Undercover Boss never expected a simple lunch rush to reveal a secret that would shatter everything he thought he knew. Anna Carlson moved through the cafeteria, her blonde hair tied back, a bandaged hand clutching a tray as she forced a polite smile. Every step was a battle against pain. Every glance from her manager Harlan a sharp reminder of his relentless scrutiny. Customers whispered, some pitying, some shaking their heads at her supposed clumsiness. What no one realized was that her injury was no accident, and Ross's cruelty hid a far darker secret. From his quiet corner booth, Harold Benton, the undercover owner, watched closely. And as he pieced together the pattern, the truth he uncovered would shock everyone. Before we dive in, if you like this kind of stories of overcoming adversity and justice, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories reach. Now let's jump back in. Enjoy the story. The clatter of trays and the smell of burnt coffee hid a quiet struggle no one dared to see. The cafeteria was already alive with noise. Forks against plates, the low murmur of morning talk, the hiss of an old coffee machine. The air carried the smell of bacon, eggs, and floor cleaner. It was ordinary, the kind of scene people pass through without a second thought. But behind the counter, moving with careful determination, was Anna Whitmore, 24 years old. Her blonde hair was tied back in a plain bun. The white apron around her waist was already streaked with stains from an early start. Her face showed no complaint, but her body did. Every movement betrayed it, just slightly. Her right hand was wrapped in a stiff bandage, the cloth yellowed from overuse. She gripped trays and poured coffee with her left hand, though she was clearly right-handed. Sometimes the bandaged hand twitched when she tried to use it, a sharp flinch quickly hidden by her forced composure. The pain was constant, the silence about it even louder. Customers saw only the smile, a small, polite smile that never quite reached her eyes. It was her shield. She used it as she balanced plates on her left arm, slid coffee cups across the counter, wiped crumbs from tables. The work was clumsy now, slower, but she pushed through with a rhythm that told of necessity, not choice. Her steps were steady, but her back carried a quiet stiffness, as though each task weighed more than the last. When she thought no one was looking, her shoulders sagged for just a moment before pulling straight again. She refused to let weakness show. At one point, as she reached to clear a plate, a sudden jolt of pain shot through her hand. Her jaw tightened. She dropped a fork onto the floor. The metal clinked louder than it should have. Her cheeks flushed. Quickly, she bent to pick it up, slipping it onto her tray as though nothing had happened. She stood tall again, smile back in place. No one commented. Most people didn't notice. Or maybe they noticed and pretended not to. That was often worse. Behind the counter, the steam clouded the glass, blurring her reflection. She caught a glimpse of herself anyway. Tired eyes, lips pressed thin. She whispered a small breath of encouragement only she could hear, then turned back to serve the next customer. But across the room, someone was watching. Not with kindness. Not with concern. Watching with the sharp eyes of a man who thrived on others' weakness. And soon, he would speak. Harlan sat near the middle of the cafeteria, his chair tipped slightly back, a paper folded on the table before him. He was 45, broad-shouldered, his dark hair neatly combed, his tie a little too tight as though meant to impress. He didn't work hard, he managed. At least, that was the word he used. He sipped his coffee slowly, not because he enjoyed it, but because it gave him something to do while watching. His eyes followed Anna's every move. When she faltered, he smiled faintly, the way one does when waiting for a trap to spring. When Anna set a tray down at a nearby table, her bandaged hand brushed against the edge. She winced almost invisibly, then moved on. Ross leaned forward, his voice carrying across the room. "Careful there, Anna," he said, tone sharp but light enough to pass as casual. "Wouldn't want you dropping plates again. Customers don't pay for broken dishes." The words weren't shouted, but they were loud enough for everyone to hear. A hush rippled through the nearby tables. Forks paused. Conversations dipped. Heads turned, eyes flickering between the young woman and her manager. Anna froze for a half-second. She steadied the tray against her hip and forced the shield of her smile. "Yes, sir." Her voice was quiet, plain, almost drowned by the scrape of a chair. Ross didn't look away. He leaned back again, folding his arms, clearly satisfied with the small discomfort he had stirred. "That's better," he said. in the same tone someone might use to scold a child. Around him, the room's air shifted. A woman in a business suit frowned slightly. An older man stirred his coffee slower than before. They didn't speak, but the unease spread like a silent draft. Anna walked on, shoulders straight, lips sealed. But the color in her cheeks betrayed the sting. Ross lifted his cup again, pretending to sip, though his grin showed he enjoyed the moment far more than the coffee. His power wasn't in the rules of the cafeteria. It was in these small cuts, delivered in public, leaving marks no one else could see. The room returned to its noise, forks scraping, cups clinking, but the echo of his words hung above it all. Everyone had heard. Everyone had chosen silence. Anna cleared another table with her left hand, the strain in her movements sharper now, but her face unchanged. And still, the eyes followed her. Not just his. Others too, whispering behind her back. At a corner table, 3 women in pressed suits leaned close over their coffee cups. Their voices were low, but not low enough. Anna's ears caught the edge of every word as she passed by with her tray. "That manager's at it again," one of them whispered, shaking her head. "Always her. Never anyone else." Another leaned in. "He's been after her for months. You can see it. Picking on her in front of customers. It's disgraceful." The third woman sighed. "But she never complains. Just keeps going. Poor thing." Anna's steps didn't falter, but her lips tightened. Their pity was heavier than the tray she balanced on her arm. She didn't want to be the subject of whispers. Not here, not anywhere. She wanted to disappear into the work, invisible, safe. But the pity clung to her, pressing against the bandages that wrapped her broken hand. She turned away before they could see the faint redness creeping up her neck. A forced smile stretched back across her face, but inside, she felt hollow. Bills didn't wait. Rent didn't bend. Heat and light had their own demands. She couldn't walk away from this job, not now. Every shift was a calculation of survival. Each hour behind the counter meant another step toward keeping a roof over her small apartment and food in her cupboard. She moved to the next table, stacking plates with her good hand. The tray wobbled slightly, the weight uneven. She adjusted quickly, hiding the struggle with a steady breath. But fatigue was catching her, each task pulling more from her than she had to give. From across the room, Ross watched with narrowed eyes, waiting. It happened as she lifted a heavy coffee pot with her left hand. Her wrist trembled. The spout tipped too far. A thin stream of dark liquid splashed onto the counter. She jerked back, startled. The pot clattered against the tray, rattling cups. A sudden silence fell. Customers' heads turned. Chairs shifted. The clink of spoons paused in midair. Anna's cheeks flushed hot. She reached for a rag, desperate to wipe the spill before anyone could react. But the moment was already his. Ross rose slowly from his chair, the scrape of its legs against the floor loud as a verdict. He stepped forward, his polished shoes clicking against the linoleum. And the cafeteria waited. Anna held the rag in her left hand, her bandaged right pressed against the edge of the counter as if bracing herself. Ross stepped closer, the scent of cologne and stale coffee drifting with him. His shadow fell across her. He leaned down, close enough that she could see the small twitch in his jaw, the self-satisfied smile forming at the corners of his lips. "Well now," he said, voice just loud enough to carry across the nearest tables. "Isn't this becoming a habit?" Anna swallowed. She dabbed at the spill, forcing her expression flat. "I'll clean it, sir." His words sliced again. "Of course you will. But how many mistakes before a worker becomes more trouble than she's worth?" Gasps fluttered around the room. A spoon dropped. Someone coughed into their hand to mask their discomfort. No one spoke. Anna kept wiping, her movements quick, controlled. But her shoulders trembled under the weight of every watching eye. She wanted only to finish, to move away, to vanish from the middle of the storm. Ross reached forward suddenly, plucking the rag from her hand. His fingers brushed against her bandaged knuckles with deliberate pressure. She flinched. He noticed. His grin widened. "Let me help," he said mockingly, holding the rag up as though it were a prize. "Though from the looks of that hand, maybe you're not fit to be serving anything." Laughter bubbled faintly from a man at the far table, then died quickly in the heavy air. Most stayed silent, eyes lowered, plates suddenly fascinating. Anna drew a sharp breath, but said nothing. She folded her arms across her apron, the shield of her smile returning though it trembled at its edges. Her silence was her only defense. Ross leaned closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "Careful, girl. Don't forget who holds your place here." His grin was sharp, predatory. Then, with a sudden flick, he dropped the rag onto the counter and turned away as though the scene were nothing more than a minor inconvenience. The room exhaled. Conversations restarted, hushed, awkward. But Anna stood frozen, staring at the rag on the counter, her hand throbbing where he had touched it. And in that silent throb of pain, memories stirred, memories she had tried hard to bury. Anna's eyes fixed on the rag Ross had dropped. The moment pressed against her chest until she could hardly breathe. The cafeteria around her blurred. Voices turned to muffled echoes, movement slowed, colors dulled. Only the throb in her bandaged hand remained sharp, pulling her backward into memory. It had been late one evening, 2 months ago. The cafeteria was closed, its lights dimmed to half. She had stayed behind to finish wiping tables and stacking chairs. It was quiet, only the hum of the refrigerator breaking the stillness. She remembered how calm it had felt, until she heard voices coming from the back office. Ross's voice. She hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but the tone had been too sharp to ignore. He was on the phone, and his words were clipped, impatient. She moved closer, quietly, until she caught the sound clear. "No, I already moved the cash. The books are clean. No one's going to find it." Her heart froze. She knew what the register totals were supposed to be. She had worked the counter often enough to notice the missing bills, the numbers that didn't add up. She thought of telling someone, but fear kept her still. And then the office door opened. Ross had stepped out, phone in hand, and stopped dead when he saw her. "What are you doing here?" His voice was a low growl. Anna stammered, holding her rag like a shield. "I was just finishing the tables." "I didn't mean." But his eyes narrowed, reading everything in her face. He saw the truth. She had heard too much. In 2 strides, he was in front of her. "You think you're clever?" His breath carried the sharp scent of whiskey. "You think you'll run to someone with what you think you know?" She shook her head, whispering, "No." The blow came fast. Not a punch, not quite. He grabbed her wrist and twisted it until pain shot up her arm. The snap of bone was muffled by her own choked gasp. She fell against the chair leg, clutching her hand as tears blurred her sight. Ross leaned down, his face inches from hers. His voice was cold, steady. "You tell anyone, and next time it won't just be your hand." Then he straightened, adjusted his tie, and walked out as though nothing had happened. She stayed curled on the floor, cradling her broken hand in silence, her breath shallow, her heart racing. That night, she wrapped the injury herself. No hospital, no report, just bandages from a corner pharmacy and the weight of fear. She had shown up to work the next morning, smile in place, hand hidden beneath the cloth. Now, standing in the cafeteria, staring at the rag he had taken from her hand, she felt the full cruelty of it. He wasn't just mocking her weakness. He was mocking the wound he had given her. And he knew she would not speak. Not yet. Anna leaned against the counter for a brief moment. Her apron was streaked, her hair damp at the temples. The bandage around her right hand felt tighter than ever, swelling against the cloth. She flexed her fingers instinctively, then winced and pressed the hand to her chest. She believed no one was looking. For the first time all day, her smile slipped completely. Her lips trembled. Her eyes closed. The exhaustion, the pain, and the silence all pooled together in that brief pause, a moment stolen between tasks. But someone was looking. At the far corner booth, where the light from the window fell across a weathered face, Harold Benton, 71 years old, sat quietly with a cup of black coffee. His suit was simple, brown jacket, plain white shirt, polished shoes that had seen decades of wear. He looked, to most eyes, like another retiree passing time with a hot drink. He had been coming here for years. The staff knew him as a regular who never asked for much. He never raised his voice, never made demands. Always the same booth. Always the same order. And he watched. This afternoon, his gaze lingered on Anna. He noticed the stiffness in her shoulders, the way her left arm carried more than its share, the flinch she thought hidden. He had seen her before, of course, quiet, polite, hardworking. But the bandaged hand was new, alarming, and it told him something had shifted. His eyes narrowed slightly. It was not pity he felt, but recognition. He had seen that look before, decades ago, in younger faces hardened by duty and silence. People carrying weight they should never have been asked to bear. He set his cup down with care, the porcelain tapping softly against the saucer. The last of the lunchtime chatter faded, leaving only the rattle of dishes from the kitchen. Anna straightened again, pulling her mask of composure back into place before carrying a stack of trays toward the sink. She passed by his table, but her eyes never met his. To her, he was no one, just another customer. But to him, she had become the reason he was here. Harold sat back, folding his weathered hands over the tabletop. Outwardly, he looked like any old man content with his coffee. Inwardly, he was sharp, attentive, listening not only to words but to silences, watching not only actions but the weight behind them. Nobody in the room knew his true place here. Not Anna, not Ross, not the whispering customers. For Harold Benton was not simply another patron. He was the owner, and everything was about to change. His posture was relaxed, but his mind was sharp, every detail of the cafeteria fixed in his memory. He had built this place 30 years ago, though almost no one knew it. Not the customers, not most of the staff. Certainly not Ross. He had chosen it that way. To Harold, titles and plaques meant little. A man's true nature revealed itself only when he believed no one important was watching. He had lived long enough to see how quickly masks slipped when power seemed one-sided. Soldiers in his unit, decades ago, had taught him that lesson in the dust and fire of another country. Back then, you learned who could be trusted when the commander's eyes were turned. The principle hadn't changed, so Harold kept his role quiet. He let managers run the front. He let workers believe he was just another retiree with too much time and a taste for plain coffee. In silence, he learned more than any clipboard or report could ever show. And today, his silence told him something was very wrong. Anna had always been steady. Not quick with words, but steady. He remembered her from her first weeks. Polite, careful, attentive. Never a complaint, never late. He had watched her carry trays with both hands, moving briskly through the morning rush without spilling a drop. That girl, strong and capable, was not the girl he saw now. Her right hand, bound in its worn bandage, changed everything. The way she hit it, the way she pushed herself with her left. These were not signs of clumsiness. They were signs of someone enduring pain with stubborn dignity. He could see the cost of it in the stiffness of her smile, the shadows beneath her eyes. Harold tapped his fingers softly against the table. He had broken bones before. He knew the posture of someone carrying that kind of pain, and he knew it wasn't an accident. He leaned back, scanning the room. His eyes lingered not on Anna now, but on the manager, Ross, who lounged at the register with a posture too smug, too easy. Harold watched the way Ross's gaze tracked Anna like a predator marking weakness. That look told him everything. From a nearby table, he caught the tail end of a conversation. Two men murmured to each other, their tones uneasy. "It's always her," one said. "He never talks to the others like that." Harold's jaw tightened, though his face remained calm. Confirmation. Cruelty wasn't random, it was targeted, and it had gone on too long. The coffee in his cup had grown cold, untouched. But Harold didn't notice. His focus was fixed. The mask was slipping, and he was watching every detail. At a table near the window, two young men in work shirts leaned over their sandwiches. Their voices carried farther than they meant. "You see how he talks to her?" the first said, shaking his head toward Ross. "Never to anyone else. Just her." The second glanced up quickly, lowering his tone. "Yeah, I've seen it. Last week, Bill spilled half a pitcher. Ross didn't say a word. But if she drops a spoon, he makes a scene." Their words weren't loud, but Harold caught every syllable. His ears, sharpened by years of listening for things unsaid, didn't miss much. He kept his gaze steady on his coffee cup, but inside his chest a quiet fire stirred. He had suspected bias. Now he heard proof from strangers with no reason to lie. This was not discipline. This was persecution. Harold's jaw clenched. He shifted slightly in his seat, the fabric of his brown jacket pulling across his shoulders. His weathered hands rested flat on the table, steady but tense, like a soldier preparing to act. And then, as if to drive the point home, Ross struck again. Anna was clearing a booth near the center of the room, her tray balanced carefully on her left arm. She bent to wipe the crumbs from the table, her bandaged hand tucked against her side. The tray wobbled under the uneven weight. A cup slid toward the edge. She caught it in time with her elbow, steadying it before it fell. Ross was across the room in 3 steps. "What do you think you're doing?" His voice was sharp, meant for all to hear. Anna straightened, eyes wide. Nothing fell, sir. He sneered. Not yet, but I don't pay staff to gamble with my dishes. His words cut across the room, loud enough that every table stilled again. A young couple stopped eating. The men near the window exchanged uneasy glances. One of them muttered, "Unbelievable." Anna's cheeks burned. She lowered her eyes and gave the smallest nod. Yes, sir. Ross lingered a moment longer, then turned sharply on his heel, his shoes striking the floor with a rhythm that echoed in the silence. Harold's hand curled slowly into a fist against the table. The murmurs of the customers, the look in Anna's eyes, the venom in Ross's tone. It was all the confirmation he needed. This was cruelty. Targeted. Calculated. And Harold Benton had seen enough. Harold raised his hand, beckoning lightly toward the counter. Excuse me, he said, his tone mild, almost grandfatherly. Ross glanced over, annoyance flickering before he masked it with a professional smile. He straightened his tie, smoothed his shirt, and strode across the floor with the swagger of someone convinced of his own importance. Yes, sir, Ross said, planting his hands on the edge of the booth. His voice was polite, his grin rehearsed. Harold leaned forward slightly, his weathered fingers tapping once against the coffee cup. That young woman, Anna. He nodded toward the counter, where she was quietly stacking dishes. Her hand. How did that happen? For a fraction of a second, Ross's eyes flickered. His smile faltered, just briefly. Then the mask snapped back into place. He gave a small laugh. That. She's clumsy. Always has been. Dropped a pan in the kitchen, injured herself. Nothing serious. He waved a dismissive hand, as though the matter were hardly worth mentioning. Harold's gaze remained steady, unreadable. I see. Ross leaned closer, lowering his voice. Truth be told, she's a bit of a liability. Sweet girl, sure, but slow. Makes mistakes. I've covered for her more times than I can count. Frankly, I've kept her on out of generosity. His tone carried the false humility of a man polishing his own image. He straightened again, waiting for praise. But Harold gave none. He studied Ross in silence, his gray eyes sharp beneath heavy brows. Years in uniform had trained him to see the flickers people tried to hide. The twitch at the corner of the mouth, the too quick glance, the overeager explanation. Ross's performance was riddled with them. Every word was a lie. Every sentence bent to make him look noble while painting her as weak. Ross shifted under the weight of Harold's silence. Anyway, he said quickly, is there something else I can get you? Another coffee? A fresh plate? Harold leaned back, folding his arms. His voice was calm, almost soft. No, that's all I needed. Ross gave a curt nod, offered a smile too tight, and walked away. Harold's eyes followed him until he disappeared behind the counter. Inside, the decision was made. He knew. He had seen men like Ross before, men who thrived on power when no one was looking. But Harold was looking, and he was done being silent. The establishment had emptied. Chairs were stacked atop tables, the low hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the otherwise silent room. Outside, the streetlights flickered in the chill of early evening. Harold remained, seated in the corner booth, his coat draped neatly over the back of the chair, a cup of cold coffee before him. He did not sip. He did not move. He simply watched. Anna moved behind the counter, her hands steady despite the fatigue that weighed visibly in her posture. A thin sheen of sweat clung to her brow, and her sleeves were rolled high, revealing scratches along her forearms, faint but persistent. She worked with precision, stacking plates, cleaning surfaces, and arranging condiments, as though each act was a silent testament to her diligence. Every small gesture spoke volumes of her character, unyielding, meticulous, honest. Harold's gaze followed her. He saw the pain in her movements, the stiffness in her joints, the exhaustion in her shoulders. And yet, she continued. Her virtue was not a quiet proclamation but a lived reality, demonstrated in every careful motion. He could feel it, a tangible integrity that contrasted starkly with the smug arrogance of the man he had just confronted. Narrowing his eyes, Harold clenched his fists under the table, a sudden surge of determination coursing through him. He was going to find out for himself. Every lie, every manipulation, every shadowed corner where Ross had hidden his misdeeds. No more circumstantial suspicions. No more second-guessing. Tonight, he would sit in quiet observation. Tomorrow, the investigation would begin in earnest. He reviewed every interaction, every word spoken. The arrogance, the subtle intimidation, the false humility, all of it pointed in one direction. Ross had underestimated him, and that miscalculation would prove costly. Harold's mind ran through possibilities, mapping the lies against evidence he could collect, preparing for a confrontation built not on conjecture, but on undeniable proof. Hours passed. Anna wiped down the last counter, sighed softly, and began stacking chairs for the night's final closure. Harold remained in the corner, silent, unwavering. His presence alone was a promise. He was witness to her toil, witness to the stark contrast between her integrity and Ross's deceit. And that witness would not remain passive. Finally, he stood, stretching, the weight of resolve settling deep in his chest. He allowed himself one last glance at her, a quiet acknowledgement of the virtue he had seen. Then, he turned toward the door, his steps measured, deliberate. If his suspicions were correct, Ross was about to face consequences he had long evaded. Justice, Harold decided, would not be subtle. It would not be postponed. It would arrive, precise and unavoidable. And Harold, having made this vow to himself, would see it delivered. The morning sun spilled through the cafeteria windows, painting long, thin rectangles of light across the floor. Harold Benton slid into his usual corner booth, placing his coat neatly on the back of the chair, his eyes immediately narrowing. This time, he was not here to sip coffee or pass time. He was here to observe with purpose, every detail accounted for, every movement catalogued. His gaze fixed firmly on Ross Harlan, who was already behind the counter, adjusting aprons, nodding at a few early patrons, his smile bright and practiced. To customers, he was cordial, efficient, even charming. He laughed lightly at a joke one of the regulars made, refilled coffee cups, and offered compliments as though genuinely concerned. But Harold had learned to see beyond the surface. His eyes shifted subtly to Anna. Her movements were deliberate, precise, yet cautious. The stiffness in her bandaged hand was obvious to anyone paying attention, though she masked it with a polite smile. Ross's charm vanished instantly when she approached the counter. His posture stiffened, lips pressing thin, eyebrows knitting just so. A flicker of impatience, barely perceptible, crossed his face whenever her attention was required. Harold noted each interaction, mentally marking the contrasts. The duality was clear. For Ross, kindness was performative. Criticism, intimidation, and micromanagement were reserved exclusively for Anna. The contrast was stark enough to be undeniable. Minutes passed. Anna handed a tray to a customer, moving slightly slower than usual. Ross appeared beside her before she could set it down. "Careful," he said, voice sharp enough to cut through the murmur of the room. "Don't spill again. I've told you before, trays are heavy, but attention isn't optional." Anna's cheeks flushed, her jaw tightened, but she simply nodded, moving on to the next table. Harold's eyes followed the exchange, noting the public chastisement. Later, a coffee cup was misplaced on the counter, inches from the edge. Ross leaned across the surface instantly. "What is this?" he demanded, voice rising just enough for nearby patrons to notice. "You've got to watch every cup." "Every cup." Anna adjusted the cup silently, avoiding his gaze. Harold's hand tightened around his coffee cup. This was not sporadic, not accidental. It was deliberate. Every minor mistake, every small slip, magnified, turned into public punishment. And it was always Anna, never anyone else. Harold leaned back, observing the subtle reactions of bystanders, quiet frowns, shifting feet, lowered voices. All confirming what he had suspected. Ross thrived on targeting her. He had created a pattern, and Harold now had proof of its consistency. The investigation had begun. Every move, every gesture, every word from Ross would be watched, cataloged, and remembered. And Harold would see this through. The next morning, Harold returned to the cafeteria before the doors opened. Ross had not yet arrived, and Anna was nowhere in sight. Harold moved toward the back office, feigning a need to check on supplies. His steps were quiet, deliberate. The door to the office creaked softly as he opened it. Stacks of papers, folders, and loose receipts cluttered the desk. Dust motes floated in the light from the single window, highlighting the disarray. Harold's eyes scanned quickly, trained to notice anomalies. He spotted a neatly stacked set of folders, each labeled with Anna's name. Picking one up, he opened it carefully. The pages were filled with incident reports, All minor. Trays dropped, spills, slight delays. But there was a pattern. Every report was worded harshly, as though exaggerating faults, and all were dated over the last 3 months. No other employee had such documentation. Harold's brow furrowed. He remembered watching Anna. Every task she performed, even under the strain of her injury, had been executed with care. Her conduct had always been exemplary. He flipped through folder after folder, each telling the same story, Ross creating a paper trail of her supposed incompetence. The juxtaposition of these falsified reports with his own observations made the injustice stark. She had been systematically framed. Then Harold's attention shifted to a smaller pile of receipts and cash register printouts tucked in the corner. His eyes narrowed. Comparing totals, he noticed discrepancies, register tallies that didn't match the actual cash flow, amounts missing, minor at first, but clearly recurring. Ross's handwriting appeared on some adjustment logs, initialing corrections that were unexplained. The pattern indicated more than petty cruelty. It hinted at theft, embezzlement carefully hidden beneath falsified discipline records. A chill ran down Harold's spine. The situation was no longer about bias or cruelty alone. Ross had deliberately injured Anna, punished her publicly, and fabricated reports to cover up a crime. Each falsified document, each irregular tally, was a calculated move, meant to protect himself and silence the truth. Harold set the papers down carefully, his mind racing. He had known Ross was cruel. He had suspected bias and harassment. But the evidence before him confirmed something far worse. Ross was not just a tyrant. He was a criminal, using his position to manipulate, harm, and steal. He leaned back against the edge of the desk, folding his arms. The weight of the realization settled on him like concrete. Every minor observation he had made, every whispered comment from bystanders, every uneasy glance, all now fit into a coherent picture of deliberate malfeasance. Harold's eyes swept the office once more, noting the careless organization, the files stacked with deceptive precision. Every move Ross had made could be documented, traced, and proven. The path forward was clear. This was no longer an exercise in observation. It was an investigation with tangible proof, a moral obligation demanding action. Ross Harlan was not just cruel. He was a criminal, and Harold Benton would make sure justice was delivered. Harold sat in his corner booth, motionless, waiting. He had stayed late before, quietly observing. Tonight, he waited for Ross Harlan to reveal himself. The office door, slightly ajar, allowed the faintest of sounds to leak into the dining area. Harold leaned forward, resting his arms on the table, ears straining. He knew Ross would not speak carelessly around others, but alone, or so he thought, he might speak freely. Moments passed. Then, muffled but distinct, Ross's voice carried from the office. "I told you," he said, low and smug. "That covering my tracks was easy. No one suspects a thing. Everyone sees her as incompetent. Perfect cover." Another voice, softer, a man perhaps from accounting, murmured agreement. "She hasn't noticed?" Ross laughed, sharp, almost vicious. "Not a chance. She's too polite, too afraid. That hand, that was me. Told her to keep quiet. Now she's perfect. Frightened, obedient, keeps the place running without raising a finger. She thinks it's her own weakness. But it's fear. My design." Harold's hands clenched under the table. His knuckles whitened. His breath caught in his chest. Every word cut through the air like glass. Ross continued, oblivious to the observer, bragging with casual cruelty. "Every false report, every petty complaint, it's all documented. Every spill, every dropped tray, carefully exaggerated. She thinks it's just me being strict, but it's all part of the plan. She's the perfect scapegoat. Meanwhile, the missing money disappears, untraceable. Everyone thinks she's just clumsy. Genius, isn't it?" Harold felt a hot weight in his chest. The rage that had simmered for days now roared silently within him. His fists curled tighter. His jaw ached from clenching. Yet he remained still, listening, witnessing, confirming beyond doubt the depths of Ross's calculation. This was no longer just bias. No longer petty harassment or a pattern of cruelty. This was deliberate, premeditated abuse and theft. Ross had injured Anna intentionally, used her fear to manipulate the public narrative, and created a false record to shield himself. Harold's mind raced, the pieces clicking into place. Every observation, every minor infraction magnified into public humiliation, every whispered comment from bystanders. All of it had been orchestrated. He exhaled slowly, feeling the gravity of his responsibility settle upon him. This was more than an opportunity for justice. It was a moral obligation, an imperative. The crime was calculated, deliberate, and personal. It could not be ignored. Harold straightened in the booth, his resolve hardened. Ross Harlan was a criminal, a tyrant, and a coward. And tomorrow, that would change. The night air was cool, brushing against Harold as he stepped out of the cafeteria. The streets were quiet, empty except for the occasional passing car. He inhaled deeply, letting the clarity of the evening sharpen his focus. Inside, the establishment had settled into silence. Anna was gone, the counters cleaned, lights dimmed. But Harold's mind remained active, replaying every detail from the past days. The falsified reports, the irregular cash tallies, Ross's own confession. Every act pointed to the same conclusion. Injustice, cruelty, and theft had flourished under Ross's watch. His instincts, honed in decades of military service, stirred. Observation had become analysis. Analysis demanded action. The pattern was clear, the evidence undeniable, and the moral imperative urgent. Ross's reign could not continue another day. Harold's fingers tightened around the strap of his coat. Every step he had taken inside that cafeteria had been deliberate, patient. But now the patience had reached its limit. He had witnessed her strength, her endurance, her quiet dignity. Anna did not need pity. She needed justice. This was not a matter of pride or power. It was a matter of duty. Ross had overstepped. He had harmed, intimidated, and concealed his wrongdoing. And Harold knew exactly what had to happen. The next morning would bring confrontation. Evidence had been collected, every action recorded. The police would not be surprised. They would arrive prepared. Ross, confident in his unchecked authority, would face the reckoning he had long evaded. Harold paused at the corner of the street, looking back at the glowing windows of the cafeteria. Inside, life would continue, unaware of the storm about to arrive. But Harold had seen enough. He had heard enough. He had decided. The truth was ready. And tomorrow, the mask would come off. The morning sun spilled across the cafeteria floor, warm and golden. Anna moved among the tables, her movements calm but deliberate. Her bandaged hand was hidden beneath her sleeve, but the stiffness in her posture betrayed the lingering pain. She wiped counters, refilled coffee pots, and balanced trays with quiet precision, each task executed with care despite the fatigue etched into her features. She carried her weight silently, as she always did, and the customers never noticed the strain behind her polite smile. Across the room, Harold entered, wearing the same brown jacket and crisp white shirt he had worn in previous visits. To anyone else, he appeared like another customer settling in for breakfast. But his posture was different, alert, purposeful. He scanned the room, noting the positions of employees, the flow of activity, and the presence of Ross at the counter. His eyes were sharp, focused, calculating. Ross emerged from the back office, adjusting his apron and straightening his tie. He smiled brightly at Harold, assuming he was just another patron, as he always did. "Good morning, sir. Can I get you some coffee?" Harold gave no acknowledgement, not a word, not a nod. Instead, his gaze settled on Anna. He watched the way she moved, her diligence apparent in every small gesture. She placed plates with precision, refilled condiments, and balanced trays as though they were an extension of herself. The injury on her hand, hidden though it was, did not diminish her competence or her integrity. Ross's attention flicked to Harold, catching the lack of response. He smiled wider, forcing the charm of routine. He had no idea that the man before him was more than just a retiree passing time. He had no inkling that every word, every observation, every false report he had created would be revealed soon. Harold's presence alone shifted the energy in the room. He did not speak, but his observation was a quiet weight, a signal that the ordinary rules had changed. Nothing about him suggested threat. No raised voice, no dramatic gestures, but every movement was deliberate, every glance purposeful. Anna continued her work, unaware of the storm gathering around her. Each action was meticulous, dignified, and precise, a testament to her quiet strength. And Harold noted every detail, storing each one in preparation for the confrontation he had planned. Ross, oblivious to the stakes, continued his routine, greeting customers, pouring coffee, managing trays. His casual arrogance betrayed him. He had no idea that his facade would soon crumble. Harold's mind cataloged everything, from the minutiae of Anna's careful work to Ross's petty criticisms. The stage was set. The reckoning would arrive today, and the power dynamic that had long oppressed Anna was about to shift decisively. Harold remained in his corner booth, quiet and composed, observing every motion. His presence was calm, almost unremarkable, but the weight behind his gaze was anything but ordinary. Ross moved among the staff, his practiced charm on full display. He smiled, poured coffee, and offered compliments to customers, each action carefully measured to maintain an image of authority and competence. He did not notice Harold's eyes on him, steady and unyielding. Harold tapped lightly on his glass, a simple, deliberate sound that carried through the room. Conversation ceased, trays paused mid-air, and all attention shifted. Silence fell like a curtain. Harold rose, moving slowly to the center of the cafeteria, the papers he had collected clutched neatly in his hand. "I am Harold Benton," he said, voice calm, deliberate, carrying easily across the room. "I am the owner of this establishment." The cafeteria froze. Customers froze. Staff froze. Ross's smile faltered, then widened awkwardly, as though the announcement were some misplaced joke. "Owner," he stammered. You must be joking." But Harold did not laugh. He laid the folders of evidence carefully on the counter, spreading them before every eye in the room. Misconduct reports, falsified incident logs, cash register discrepancies. All documented, all visible. The collective shock was immediate. Forks paused mid-bite. Customers leaned forward, eyes wide. Anna's hand, still bandaged, tightened around a cloth. Her heart raced as she processed the words, the presence, the proof. Ross's face paled, the arrogance draining instantly. This is absurd," he exclaimed, voice rising. "You have no—" Harold's calm cut through the protest. "Every report here," he said, tapping the top folder, "documents your lies, your manipulations, your theft. You have injured your employee, publicly humiliated her, and falsified records to cover your crimes. All of it is here. And now, everyone knows." The room murmured, disbelief and anger blending into a tense hum. Ross's eyes darted around, seeking allies, excuses, a way out, but there was none. Every lie he had built was laid bare. Anna's breath caught. She stared at Harold, her eyes wide with disbelief, relief, and dawning hope. The weight she had carried, the quiet endurance, the daily struggle, all recognized, all validated. Harold remained composed, his voice even, his posture unwavering. The authority he had quietly exercised from his corner booth now radiated fully. Ross could no longer hide. The power dynamic had shifted. The evidence spoke. The truth was undeniable. And for the first time, Anna was seen as she truly was, not as a victim, but as a steadfast, competent, and dignified force in the room. Ross Harlan's confident posture had collapsed into rigidity, his forced smiles gone, replaced with panic that flickered in his eyes. Harold stepped forward, placing a hand on the spread of evidence across the counter. The folders, filled with falsified reports, financial discrepancies, and detailed logs of Anna's supposed failings, were impossible to ignore. His voice was calm, unwavering, cutting through the murmurs like a knife. "Ross Harlan," Harold began, his gray eyes locking onto the man's pale face. "You have engaged in systematic harassment, theft, and deliberate injury against your employee, Anna Carlson." Ross's mouth opened, closed, searched for words. "This is ridiculous. I don't know what you're talking about." Harold lifted a folder, flipping to a marked page. "These incident reports," he said slowly, deliberately, "all document minor, exaggerated mistakes that you have fabricated to discredit her. None of these reflect reality. You have intentionally framed her to cover your own misconduct." A hush fell over the room. Customers shifted, whispering. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Staff exchanged wide-eyed glances. Anna's breath was shallow, her hands trembling as she pressed a towel to her chest. Harold continued, his voice steady. "And these financial discrepancies," he said, pointing to a stack of cash register logs, "prove that you have been diverting money for personal gain. The injury you inflicted on Anna's hand, deliberate, premeditated, was meant to silence her and maintain your control. Ross spluttered, waving his hands. No, that's insane. This is a setup. A misunderstanding. Harold's gaze did not waver. The truth is here, Ross. Your arrogance, cruelty, and deception are exposed. And it ends now. The customers murmured their shock, some leaning closer to get a better view of the evidence. Their disbelief turned to understanding, their whispers confirming what Harold had long observed. The room collectively saw Ross for what he truly was. He took a slow step back, allowing the weight of the accusations to settle. The power that Ross had wielded so freely, through fear, intimidation, and deceit, was now fully stripped away. Every attempt to deny, to redirect, or to charm his way out of responsibility was futile. And then, in a deliberate, quiet moment, Harold signaled. Outside, the sound of approaching footsteps carried over. The law enforcement officers he had already alerted, arriving to uphold the justice he had meticulously prepared. Ross's face paled further, the last traces of bravado vanishing. The room had witnessed the full scope of his wrongdoing, his lies, and his deliberate abuse. There was nowhere to hide, and no one left to deceive. Anna's eyes met Harold's, a mix of relief, gratitude, and newfound confidence shining in them. She had endured, and now the truth, the full weight of it, was being recognized publicly. The cafeteria doors opened, and two uniformed officers entered, moving with purpose. Their presence was calm, authoritative, and silent. Ross Harlan froze mid-step, his eyes widening in disbelief. The carefully constructed mask of arrogance and control that had guided him for months shattered in an instant. The officers approached without a word. Ross tried to gesture, to explain, to charm, but the words faltered in his throat. His voice cracked as he stammered. There's been a mistake. One officer produced a pair of cuffs. Mr. Harlan, you're under arrest for harassment, assault, and theft. You have the right to remain silent. Ross's protests grew frantic, desperate, but no one in the room paid attention. The customers watched, some frozen, some whispering, some shaking their heads in disbelief. His own staff looked on in a mixture of relief and astonishment. The cafeteria, once a stage for his cruelty, had become a courtroom in all but name. Harold stood back, calm and steady, watching the culmination of days of careful observation, investigation, and patience. Ross's bravado crumbled entirely as the officers guided him toward the exit. Each cuff snapped shut with finality, a sound that resonated through the room like the closing of a chapter. Anna remained at her station, her hands still trembling slightly. She had been part of every moment, the humiliation, the silent endurance, the careful work, but now, relief washed over her. The weight she had carried, the daily struggle to maintain dignity under the oppressive presence of Ross, was lifted. Her eyes filled with tears, though she did not move to wipe them immediately, letting the emotions settle quietly over her. The officers moved Ross out the door, his protests fading into the hum of the early morning traffic. The clatter of trays and cups slowly returned, the room resuming its rhythm, though lighter, freer. The fear and tension that had lingered for months dissipated in their absence, replaced by a sense of restored order. Harold approached Anna, his presence calm, authoritative, but gentle. "It's over," he said softly. "You've endured more than anyone should. But the truth has been seen. The injustice ends here." Anna blinked, swallowing hard, her chest rising and falling as if she were finally able to breathe fully for the first time in months. The cafeteria, her place of labor and silent suffering, now felt safe. Her co-workers offered nods of respect, gestures of understanding, and quiet smiles that acknowledged the ordeal she had survived. Harold looked at the room, the patrons, and the staff. Justice had arrived, not in chaos, not through anger, but through patience, observation, and truth. And the one who had suffered quietly, invisibly, had her dignity restored. The cafeteria, once a place of fear, now resonated with a subtle, quiet triumph. Anna stood behind the counter, her hands still wrapped in bandages, but her posture was steadier, more assured. Harold approached her, walking slowly, deliberately, his presence calm but commanding. "Anna," he said, his voice softening from the authority it had carried during the confrontation. "I want you to know that what you've done here has not gone unnoticed. You have held this place together through grace, patience, and determination." Anna blinked, caught off guard by the recognition. She had endured months of scrutiny, humiliation, and physical pain, never expecting acknowledgement, much less praise. Her lips parted, words faltering, as she tried to respond. Harold continued, "Your strength, your dedication, and your integrity are remarkable. It's time for that to be reflected, not just in words, but in your role." He gestured to the counter, then to the open floor beyond it. "You will be promoted to manager. You'll oversee operations here, with the authority and respect you have earned every day." A quiet gasp rippled through the room. Customers paused mid-conversation, their eyes drawn to Anna. Staff members exchanged looks of astonishment, admiration, and relief. The woman who had been overlooked, underestimated, and unfairly treated was now recognized as the leader she had always been capable of becoming. Tears welled in Anna's eyes, not from sorrow, but from overwhelming relief and gratitude. She pressed a hand to her chest, her shoulders relaxing for the first time in months. Her voice trembled as she spoke. I don't know what to say. Thank you. I've just tried to do my best." "You did more than that," Harold said quietly. "You've shown all of us what quiet strength really means. Today, that strength is seen, acknowledged, and honored." The customers, sensing the magnitude of the moment, began to clap softly. Then staff members joined, a ripple of applause that carried through the cafeteria, affirming Anna's resilience and integrity. She lifted her head, standing taller, letting the recognition settle into her posture. Harold gave a subtle nod, his own approval quiet but sincere. He turned slightly to the room, acknowledging the collective witness. The injustice had ended, and now the community, in its small but meaningful way, celebrated her vindication. Anna took a deep breath, her expression steady, resolute. The humiliation, the fear, the private struggles, all of it had led to this moment of rightful acknowledgement. She was no longer the silent victim. She was the person who had endured, persisted, and now stood in the light of her own dignity. For the first time in months, the cafeteria felt complete, not just a workplace, but a place where respect and justice had been restored. Anna worked behind the counter, her bandaged hands still healing, yet her movements were confident and deliberate. Every action reflected precision and calm, a clear signal of her regained authority. She arranged trays, refilled condiments, and greeted each customer with a steady smile that conveyed competence and assurance. The fatigue of past months lingered only as a shadow, now softened by recognition and justice. Harold sat in his usual corner booth, the morning sunlight catching the silver of his hair. He was calm, observing as always, but this time with a sense of satisfaction that went beyond mere oversight. The role he had quietly maintained for years, as both guardian and witness, was fulfilled. The injustice had been confronted, the wrongs corrected, and the truth affirmed. He watched Anna for a moment, noting how naturally she carried her authority. She no longer moved under the weight of fear, but with the confidence of someone whose resilience had been recognized and rewarded. Customers greeted her respectfully. Staff followed her guidance without hesitation, and the environment itself seemed to hum with restored balance. Harold allowed himself a small, approving smile. It was quiet, understated, but it carried the weight of his long-term observation and careful intervention. Justice had arrived not through spectacle, not through anger, but through patience, precision, and moral clarity. He had ensured that the person who had suffered silently would finally be seen. The cafeteria's rhythm continued, the soft clatter of dishes, the murmur of conversation, the hiss of the espresso machine. Life returned to its ordinary cadence, yet every detail felt infused with a renewed integrity. Every action, every smile, every gesture was a reminder that the past wrongs had been confronted and resolved. Harold's thoughts settled on a single truth: quiet strength, patience, and truth prevail when recognized and supported. Anna's dignity had been restored, Ross's deceit unmasked, and the community reminded that integrity and perseverance carry their own power. He sipped his coffee slowly, eyes scanning the room, noting the small details, the light falling across polished counters, The way Anna nodded politely at a returning customer, the subtle respect in every glance shared among staff. Everything was as it should be. The morning carried on, ordinary yet profound, a testament to endurance, courage, and justice fulfilled. Harold remained in his corner booth, content but vigilant, knowing the balance had been restored. And in that quiet, steady observation, the truth of the story settled. Patience, observation, and courage restore dignity, expose deceit, and ensure that justice, quiet, deliberate, and unwavering, prevails. Thank you for following this story. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and share your thoughts below. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. Stay tuned for more immersive stories.